Imagine walking into a room full of the richest, most powerful investors, with your mother by your side. Now imagine those investors telling her to wait outside. What do you do next? For Donald Trump, that moment wasn't just a challenge. It was a turning point that shocked everyone and changed his entire life. Stay tuned, because this story will blow your mind. You won't believe what happened the day Donald Trump's mother, yes, his real mother, walked into a room full of millionaires and was told to leave. It was a crisp morning in New York City, decades ago, when a young, ambitious Donald Trump was preparing to pitch one of the biggest real estate deals of his early career. The meeting was set in a sleek, high-rise boardroom overlooking Manhattan, where some of the city's most powerful and wealthy investors were gathering. These men were used to big deals, bold ideas, and bigger egos. The table was polished mahogany, the chairs made of Italian leather, and the air thick with power. These weren't just businessmen. They were the gatekeepers of opportunity. And for Donald Trump, this meeting could be life-changing. He walked in sharply dressed, confident, and focused. He had rehearsed his pitch 100 times, memorized every number, every figure. This was the moment he had been waiting for, to prove he wasn't just Fred Trump's son, but a serious businessman in his own right. But as he entered, someone else followed him in quietly. His mother, Mary Ann McLeod. Trump. She wasn't supposed to be there. She didn't come to speak or to interfere. She simply wanted to sit in the back, watch her son take a big step forward in life, and support him, the way only a mother could. She wore a modest coat, her hair neatly done. No designer labels. No flashy jewelry. Just a kind smile and a quiet presence that held decades of struggle, sacrifice, and strength. As she gently took a seat near the back corner of the room, you could feel a few glances from the table. A few curious eyes, some confused, some dismissive, and then it happened. One of the investors, a man with slicked back hair, a smug grin, and a voice that sounded like money, leaned forward and said, "Excuse me, who's that?" Donald replied calmly, "That's my mother." The man scoffed. "This is a serious business meeting, son, not a family dinner. She'll have to wait outside." The room chuckled, not loudly, but just enough to sting. One investor looked down at his papers, pretending not to notice. Another smirked but didn't say a word. It was the kind of moment where everyone knows what just happened was wrong, but no one wanted to speak up. Mary Ann didn't react. She simply sat still, as if she'd heard worse in her lifetime, and she probably had. But Donald? He paused. For a split second, he looked at his mother. Then he looked around the room, at the men who would decide whether or not to fund his dream. Men who didn't know his story. Men who didn't know her story. They only saw an old woman who didn't belong. What Trump did next, it shocked everyone. He didn't stay silent. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask her to leave. Instead, he slowly placed his notes on the table. Then he stood up, looked directly at the man who had spoken, and said, "Let me make something very clear. That woman you just told to wait outside is the reason I'm standing here today." You could hear the air shift. The room tensed. She left Scotland at 18 years old. She came to this country with nothing. She worked as a maid in people's homes while most of you were born into privilege. And she didn't just raise me, she taught me how to survive, how to fight, how to stand up for myself and for others. One of the investors shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Trump continued, "If she's not welcome in this room, then neither am I." Then he reached for his briefcase and prepared to walk out, not caring about the millions on the line or the power those men held. And in that moment, everything changed. The room fell silent. The investor who had made the comment. He lowered his eyes. Another man, one of the oldest in the room, stood up and said, "Son, sit back down. You've got something more valuable than money. You've got respect." Applause didn't break out. This wasn't a movie. But what did happen was more powerful. They listened to him because he had stood for her. And that was the beginning of Donald Trump's rise. Not just as a businessman, but as someone who never forgot who made him who he was. Before we get to that explosive moment in the boardroom, let's take a step back. Everyone knows Donald Trump today as a billionaire businessman, a former president of the United States, and a man who has made headlines for decades. Whether you admire him or criticize him, you can't ignore him. But very few people know where it all really began, and just how deeply his journey was shaped by a woman who stayed mostly out of the spotlight. His mother, Mary Ann McLeod Trump. Her story isn't told often, but it's one that deserves attention. Mary Ann was born in a small fishing village called Tong on the Isle of Lewis in Scotland. It was a rugged, windswept place where life was hard and opportunities were few. She grew up in a stone house with no electricity, no modern plumbing, just old-fashioned grit and a strong sense of faith. In 1930, at just 18 years old, she made a bold decision that would change her life, and eventually shape the course of American history. She boarded a ship called the SS Transylvania and sailed to the United States, alone. She arrived in New York City with barely any money, no connections, and a thick Scottish accent. But what she did have was determination, humility, and a willingness to work hard, no matter what. She found work as a domestic servant, cleaning houses, cooking, making beds, and doing the kind of jobs that are often looked down on, but that build a nation. She saved every penny, stayed out of trouble, and kept her head down, all while dreaming of a better future. And it was in New York that she met Fred Trump, a successful young builder who was already making a name for himself in real estate. The two eventually married and started a family together in Queens. They had 5 children, one of whom was Donald. Mary Ann wasn't a loud or flashy woman. She was soft-spoken, deeply religious, and devoted to her family. But she had a quiet strength, the kind that doesn't need attention to make an impact. Growing up, Donald Trump was known to be a bold, rebellious kid, but his mother kept him grounded. She taught him the value of loyalty, the importance of self-respect, and the belief that if the world pushes you down, you stand up taller. In interviews years later, Trump would often say, "My mother gave me my sense of showmanship. She was tough, but loving. She believed in me before anyone else did." So when Mary Ann walked into that boardroom years later, just to quietly support her son, she wasn't just a curious parent tagging along. She was the living reminder of everything he stood for. The foundation beneath the billionaire, and when someone tried to dismiss her, when someone laughed at her presence, it wasn't just a personal insult. It was an attack on everything she represented: hard work, sacrifice, and the immigrant dream. And that's why Donald Trump stood up, not just for his mother, but for everything she built inside of him. The meeting was set in the heart of Manhattan, high above the noisy streets in a boardroom that screamed wealth and influence. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls gave a breathtaking view of the New York skyline, but inside, the air was heavier than the city fog. This was no casual business gathering. It was a meeting of power players, a collection of seasoned, wealthy investors who controlled the kind of capital that could make or break a career. These weren't the kind of men who smiled easily or gave second chances. They were sharp, skeptical, and used to saying no without hesitation. And at the center of it all, stepping into this lion's den, was a young Donald Trump. He was ambitious, sharply dressed in a tailored suit, and carried himself with a quiet but unmistakable confidence. The project he was about to pitch was bold. A plan to redevelop a rundown hotel property into a world-class luxury high-rise. He believed in the vision with everything he had, but he knew the room was against him from the start. These men had seen it all, and Trump, despite his famous last name, was still just a rookie to them. A risk. As Trump entered the boardroom, something unexpected happened. Walking just a few steps behind him, almost unnoticed at first, was his mother, Mary Ann McLeod Trump. She didn't say a word. She wasn't there to interfere. She simply took a seat near the back corner of the room, calm and respectful, her hands folded in her lap. She had no documents, no phone, no agenda. She was just there, as a mother, watching her son prepare to take a major step forward. But in a room filled with sharp suits and sharper egos, her presence didn't go unnoticed for long. Just a few minutes into Donald's presentation, just as he began laying out his vision, the costs, the architectural plans, one of the lead investors interrupted. He leaned forward, his voice smooth but dismissive. "Who is that?" Donald looked up. "That's my mother." There was a pause. Then came a short laugh from another corner of the room. "This isn't a school play, son. Tell her to wait outside." A few chuckles followed. Nothing loud, but enough to sting. The investors exchanged amused glances, their expressions clearly saying, "This kid brought his mom to $1 million meeting?" Donald Trump stood at a crossroads. He could have laughed it off. He could have leaned over, whispered to his mother, and politely asked her to step out, saved the deal, saved face, and moved on. But he didn't. Instead, he looked around the room, calmly, firmly, and then did something no one expected. He slowly set down his papers, stood up straight, and prepared to say something that would not only shift the mood in the room, but would also mark a defining moment in his journey from an underdog to a future titan of real estate. What came out of his mouth next would shock every single M. Donald Trump slowly placed his notes down on the polished mahogany table. The chatter in the room faded as all eyes turned toward him. The confident, sharp businessman now stood with a calm intensity, fixing his gaze on the very man who had dared to insult his mother. The room, once buzzing with skepticism and quiet laughter, suddenly went dead silent. Trump cleared his throat, then began, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "Gentlemen," he said, "let me be clear. The only reason I'm standing here today, the only reason I have the strength to pitch a deal like this, is because of the woman you just asked to leave." He paused, letting those words hang in the air. She came to this country with nothing, no money, no connections, just hope and hard work. Trump's eyes scanned the room, meeting each man's gaze one by one. She worked jobs that most of you wouldn't even consider, cleaning houses, scrubbing floors, making beds, and just to provide for her family. She did everything she could to give her children a better life. And most importantly, she taught me something invaluable: discipline, integrity, and the unshakable belief that you must believe in yourself even when nobody else does. The silence in the room was palpable. Not one investor dared to speak. Trump's voice grew stronger, his passion shining through. "So if this room doesn't have space for my mother, then maybe it doesn't have space for me either." He slowly started gathering his papers, the unmistakable signal that he was ready to walk out. The tension was electric. The investors exchanged uneasy glances. They had come expecting a confident pitch, but they were now faced with something much more powerful, a lesson in respect, loyalty, and the roots of success. And then, something surprising happened. The very same man who had ordered Mary Ann to wait outside, the man who had smirked and belittled her presence, stood up. The entire room held its breath. With steady eyes, the investor extended his hand across the table. "Trump," he said, "sit down. You just made your first sale." The room erupted in applause, but it wasn't just polite clapping. It was genuine, because what Trump had done was more than defending his mother. He had reminded everyone of something crucial. Success isn't just about money or power. It's about respect, loyalty, and honor. That moment changed everything. From that day forward, Trump was no longer just Fred Trump's son. He was a man who stood for his family and his values, a man who demanded respect, not just for himself, but for those who helped shape him. And the investors? They saw something rare, a combination of ambition and heart that made them believe in both the man and his vision. That deal, the one Trump almost walked away from, was fully funded. It became one of his first major successes, launching him into the world of luxury real estate development and fame. But perhaps more importantly, that day in the boardroom was a defining moment for Donald Trump. It wasn't just a business meeting, it was a declaration, a statement that no matter how high you climb, never forget where you came from, and never let anyone disrespect the people who stood by you, because in that room filled with power and money, the real strength wasn't in the buildings or the dollars, it was in standing up for family, for dignity, and for respect. That deal, born from a small spark of defiance and a powerful stand, would go on to become one of Donald Trump's first major successes in the world of real estate. The luxury high-rise project, once doubted by seasoned investors, was fully funded after that meeting. The investors who had initially questioned his youth and boldness now saw a man who was not only ambitious, but unshakably loyal to his roots. News of the project quickly spread. Headlines praised the boldness of the plan, the transformation of a tired hotel into a shimmering symbol of New York's luxury real estate scene. The deal wasn't just about dollars and cents. It was about a young entrepreneur making a statement and demanding respect not just for himself, but for the woman who had stood quietly in the back of the room. That moment became a defining chapter in Trump's career, one that launched him into the spotlight and earned him serious respect in a cutthroat industry. But beyond the glitter and the glamour, the most important lesson wasn't about success or fame. It was about never being ashamed of where you come from. It was about honoring the people who got you there, and it was about never letting anyone, no matter how powerful, disrespect your roots. This lesson stayed with Trump through the years, long after the meeting was over. It was a reminder of everything his mother had given him, not just in material support, but in values, in strength, and in character. Mary Ann McLeod Trump passed away many years later, but her influence never faded. Donald Trump often mentioned her in interviews, speeches, and even his books. He credited her with shaping the man he became, saying, "My mother didn't just raise me, she built me." Her story became part of his own legend, the immigrant mother with grit and grace who gave her son a foundation no money could buy. And on that unforgettable day in that towering Manhattan boardroom, when the powerful men tried to push her out, Trump made it crystal clear, "If she's not welcome, I'm not interested." That bold stand sent a ripple far beyond just one meeting. It was a message to the world that family matters, that respect is earned through loyalty and courage, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand up for the people who stood by you when no one else would. That story of a mother's love, a son's courage, and a room full of power brokers remains an inspiring lesson for anyone chasing a dream, facing doubt, or fighting to protect what matters most. Because sometimes, the greatest victories aren't the ones you see in headlines or bank accounts. They're the moments when you refuse to let anyone erase your history or diminish your people. And in Donald Trump's story, that moment was everything. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more amazing stories like this. Also, click the bell icon so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.